Hi, everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of Vomitus. I am your host, Jennifer Ann Gordon, author of the award-winning novel Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent, as well as the Hotel series and the upcoming Pretty Ugly. With me again, as always, is my Vomitus vixen, Allison Martine, author of the Bourbon books. Cheers, Allison. And we have an amazing guest with us today, somebody that I have been dying to talk to ever since I heard she wrote a book about the Donner Party, and then I heard she wrote a book about the Titanic. Alma Katsu. Welcome, Alma.
Thanks for having me here.
And we are here talking about her new book, Red Widow. So, Alma, let's have you tell our audience a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your new book.
Well, I'm probably one of the more confusing authors out there. I've been writing for about 10 years now, and the first 5 books were all sort of a mix of historical plus horror or supernatural or that sort of thing. The last 2, The Hunger and the Deep, being sort of straightforward historical horror. But then my most recent book is a spy novel. It has nothing to do with horror. You were holding up, I think you held it up, right? Here's the cover. I get people writing to me saying, this isn't a horror novel.
Like, I know, I wrote it.
No, it's not. I'm really sorry. But the reason I wrote it is because a few years ago, I retired from a career in intelligence. I actually was a lifelong employee of CIA and the National Security Agency and stuff like that. And so I got the opportunity to sort of apply what I'd learned as a writer to writing a novel. And, you know, for reasons, I just felt like there was a different kind of spy novel that I wanted to write. And I was lucky enough that Putnam, my publisher, gave me the opportunity.
Well, it's almost like the bigger question is why you weren't writing spy novels to start, because you have all this info. Like, because it's classified, that's why.
I was going to say, she probably couldn't technically, legally write spy novels while working for
You can, but it's harder. So when you get a security clearance, one of the first things you sign is the non-disclosure agreement that says for as long as you live, not just as long as you work in it, but as long as you live, if you ever write anything that has to do with your job, they get to do a pre-publication review. And when you're still an employee, I know, it's scary.
That gave me like chills.
Yeah. So, you know, when you're still an employee, there's a bunch of things that they can kind of censor you for, right? But once you're retired, it can only be for classified information. So it's easier to do it when you're no longer employed by them. I mean, it's hard enough to sort of thread that needle, but it's easier. So that actually was part of the reason why I thought it would just be best to stick with what I was doing. I mean, you know, the biggest part, of course, was that's what I felt like writing at the time. That was the kind of stories that were speaking to me. But I also knew that, you know, they could make it hard. So, for instance, after my first book came out, The Taker, I actually resigned from government because the agency I was working for at the time was making it so hard for me to meet with the press and stuff like that. Like, they wanted 4 days to clear any interview with the press. And, you know, when you go to like a book festival, you sit in a tent and you wait for the press to come up to you. So, you know, that was like a non-starter. Yeah.
Yeah, you can't sit in that tent for 4 days. Hold on. We'll be here for a while.
Wait for it.
Wait for it. 4 days.
Is there a bathroom around here?
You would need snacks. They would need snacks.
Definitely. So yeah, that was one reason. And I tried to write spy novels, but I guess my heart just wasn't in it. And I wasn't making them, you know, they weren't hitting that mark, so to speak. But
so,
well, and go ahead.
Go. I was just going to say, Allison and I both write in different genres. I also write horror, and my book that's coming out next month is horror-ish, and the book I'm working on right now is not horror at all. So I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of, what are you doing? Like, I thought you were the person who wrote about ghosts in this haunted island. And I'm going to be like, but sometimes I want to write about beep. I can't talk about it. But
right now, Jen is under an NDA with her and the project. So
I'm like, I can't speak about that.
You know, but it's true. And I've gotten a lot of questions about that, as you can imagine. And I think, you know, most writers naturally would like to write in multiple genres. And what's more prohibitive is the business end of things. It's marketing is so hard. So, and I'm finding that out now. It's sort of hard to market as both a horror writer and as a spy novelist. So, even when we were looking at, how are we going to redesign the website, and I was looking for comps, other authors who sort of fall in that ballpark, they're far and few between. And I think readers don't understand it's not because that's not what we would like to write, but just because, there's a business reason behind it.
And I think also there was probably more authors that do it, but they do it under two different names.
Right.
So they have two different brands. But then I don't think sometimes you need that. But then you get authors like Matt Ruff, who writes everything from like contemporary, like dysfunctional romance to Lovecraftian horror and science fiction.
Sci-fi, yeah.
And they found a way to make one of his shows an HBO, one of his books into an HBO TV show. So I feel like you can be a spy author and also historical horror.
Well, it would have made more sense if I had started off with a pseudonym for the horror books, and then I could just use my real name. But to come up with a pseudonym for the spy novels, we all agreed, the publisher and the agent, that was too silly. So, we're trying it this way. We'll see how it goes. Yeah.
Well, I think it's going very well.
It's
going very well.
Except for those emails from people saying, I bought your book and it's not a horror.
We all get those emails from people. Just hit delete.
Isn't it funny? Yeah, you want to think that you won't, but you do.
Well, on one hand, you want those fans that they say, oh, I'm the auto buy person. I see that person's name, I buy the book. But you kind of do want them to read at least the blurb or the synopsis or something. So if they're like, I only read this genre and I wandered out of that genre, they at least know. I mean, I look at that cover and nothing there says horror. Nothing there tells me that it should be like the other books. But
there's like a government seal with Russian language on it. It's just nothing about this says, I wonder if this is a historical reimagining of a traumatic event with ghosts.
Yeah, I don't mean to make fun of anybody.
No, I know.
It was really and where did you put your brain this morning? No. Very, very odd.
Well, and it's funny though. I mean, what I was going to say earlier is my background as an attorney. People were always asking, "Oh, so do you write legal thrillers?" And I've always said I have zero desire to do that. And part of it is they presume what lawyering is like and what my experience was. And I'm going, yeah, if you want to see a book about people sitting around in mediation and wondering when there's going to be more bagels coming in, that's probably not the most intriguing book. I can imagine a lot more interesting scenarios than anything I lived when it comes to like the lawyer background. But I mean, I love that you're able to take advantage of that now. And I'm assuming since none of it's classified, you're able to kind of pull in real life experience, but imagined versions. So heightened and more exciting.
Yeah, I mean, so for this book, first of all, it's based on actually a true story, something that happened, but it was just changed a lot so that the true story is pretty buried, because if I told you what it was, you'd recognize it. It's something that was in the news, never publicly associated with CIA. So
you're killing Jen.
So everything you said, Allison, believe me, I understand. Because for a long time, I didn't really want to write a spy novel for that very reason. Every time I talked to an editor or an agent, they were like, oh, well, you can write what it's really about. Well, what it's really about is nothing, or very little, like what popular, culture, what movies and TVs and books to a certain degree would have you think the job is. It's got to be written so that it appeals to modern audiences,
right.
With a lot more drama and tension and all that fun stuff. And I, like you, I wasn't really interested in portraying that, just another one of those. But there were things I was interested in, and one of them had to do with women. I just didn't feel women were very well represented in popular cultures, about spy work.
I can name a bunch right now, and I will not.
I was going to say, I feel like they are, but like in an overly sexualized, like the female spy is like in pop culture a step above a prostitute. And I feel like, the spies are, they're gorgeous. They're just like, use
Or
their
they come
sex.
across like they're completely bubble-headed, and yet they're thwarting plans, and you're going, I don't think you could find your shoes in the morning based on how this character acts in other scenes, but then they're also supposed to be this brilliant person who has uncovered this big conspiracy, and then they risk it all, and it just ends up feeling very ridiculous. But I will not name any shows.
Yeah, what show you're talking about there? But
not naming any blonde actresses ever.
Okay.
Nope.
Yeah. And I hate to be negative about a lot of that, because it has brought a lot of women to the genre. A genre that's not traditionally, especially in novels, doesn't have like a really big female audience. So, but I wanted to write a book where it was predominantly female characters and showing them as professionals, represented how we are today. Sorry about that. Can you hear my phone going off in the background?
It happens.
The machine will get it.
This is the bad thing about West Virginia. Like, you legally have to have a phone in your house.
Wait, you do?
Yeah, and I haven't had
landline law?
a landline. Right, I haven't had a landline in like 15 years, but we have
still have a landline because we have terrible cell service, and
Oh.
I get it.
And we can't seem to rip it out of the wall. But
Don't do that. It's illegal.
Yeah. But anyway, so that's what I think, like one of the things that's made Red Widow stand out. Like, I've gotten so many emails and letters and things from former agency people, a lot of them women, saying that it's just the most realistic portrayal of the culture and what the job's really like. I just got a blurb from Valerie Plame, as a matter of fact, and she was saying, that she just loved it, and that she really enjoyed the accuracy of the book. So that's been super rewarding. And it's actually been picked up by Fox for a TV series. And that's the reason why they wanted it. They wanted a show that featured women, but, was very true to life, authentic, showed them as being patriots, that sort of thing, and not, sexualized. So, very.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
It is doing well. We were right. You're like, I don't know how well it's going to do. I mean,
only Fox picked it up.
Fox picked it up, and it'll probably be a hit TV series.
Well, we're hoping. It's a lot of work. I mean, really, since the book came out, I've probably been as busy with the TV, getting the TV show up and running. I say that because I love the book and I wish it had a bigger audience. But you know how it is as authors, you always wish you had a bigger audience, right?
And the audience will grow.
Yeah.
Too.
If it's getting picked up by Fox, that audience is going to come back and go, oh, it's based on a book. I mean, there are so many books that I read long before they became a show, and then everybody's discovering them when they become a show or a movie, and it's
Let's hope.
I'm sure it will factor back in.
It will, because when Lovecraft Country came out, I didn't watch the show. I said, oh, there's a book. I'm going to go read the book, and then I'm going to watch the show. So there are readers will do that. And as you said, and spy novels aren't I hate to say this, like typically female.
It's true.
Genre. Like, we just don't think of it, even though like we should think of every genre as being for everybody, because people are just, humans.
Right.
But I will say, I'm still very early on in Red Widow. You have such a great voice.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, immediately I was drawn into your main character. Like, or at least one of the main characters, the one because I know there's two.
There's two. And and that's another aspect of the book that I was hoping would resonate with female readers. And that is, it's the relationship between these two women. It's not just focused on some kind of spy operation, but it's a very character-driven novel. And it's about these two women who end up being pulled together for certain reasons and, depending on each other and having this friendship, but then also being put in this position of being adversaries too. And so, I think it makes a really interesting dynamic that a lot of women will find somewhat familiar.
I think we've all had frenemies.
Yeah.
And we've all had really intense female friendships that, and we've talked to a lot of mainly female authors about female friendships and how so many of us, like, that's where we find our inspiration, because it's a dynamic and it's a relationship that is constantly changing.
Yeah.
And it's not less than a love story.
Right.
Exactly. And I just love that you're saying it's about two women and that relationship there. And it isn't necessarily, okay, well, if there's a relationship, it has to be a romantic relationship, and it has to be how she loses herself to this man, or she's choosing between that. Because I find that sometimes it underscores, okay, well, she can't be a complete woman if she doesn't have a man in her life. I like that that's not the direction it went. I know for me, that's always a theme I like exploring, is even whatever genre I'm doing, exploring female relationships and how complicated they are. So, I mean, the fact that you're doing a more male-dominated genre, but with a female twist, I love that. And I don't see how that wouldn't resonate with all sorts of readers, whether they're not as comfortable with the genre or if they're not as comfortable with female leads, because I think you'll probably find both.
Yes. And, I've had the opportunity to talk to a fair number of male readers, reviewers, guys. Most of the spy or thriller review sites are guys. And so far, the response has been really good. Now, if they can convince their followers to give it a try, that would be wonderful. But we'll see. Yeah, like I said, so far the response has been fairly well, but I think it's not as, it hasn't been sampled as broadly as I would hope it would be.
Well, it will be. But I feel like you have experience at this, because if you worked for, government and, the Central Intelligence Agencies, and you survived that, and the horror community is better with women now, but for a very long time, it was and still it can be a boys' club. So,
well, and I have a question about that, because I would say, I know I've seen the deep described as gothic horror. Mm-hmm. And I know that, Jen, your horror often falls into the gothic horror. And we've had some prior authors come on who also fall into gothic horror. So is there something about gothic horror that seems to be more female dominated? And is that like a niche that female horror authors get kind of either pushed into or just more comfortable there? Or am I just, my own experience has given me a weird sample?
I think it weirdly kind of, for me, it comes out of like Shirley Jackson and Edith Wharton, where it was like, originally it was like domestic horror or inside horror. So it's a lot of times it's about like servants or being in a structure. So that's why I think the deep falls really. Or a
stewardess on the Titanic.
Exactly. It's basically Downton Abbey with ghosts on water.
Why didn't I think of that?
That wasn't a call back then, but okay.
Good marketing.
You can use that. You can use that.
Thank you. I'll bring that up to my publisher. Maybe there's something they can do with that. We should have thought of that. Maybe do a trailer with the
trailers,
violin
with Edith from Downton Abbey, and she can be Annie.
Something. It's interesting you bring that up, because when my first book, The Taker, which came out 10 years ago, I mean, I didn't think of it as a horror novel, but it sort of went in that direction. It was described a lot like Interview with a Vampire, but with no vampires, right? And so very dark.
Just an interview.
Just an interview.
Basically, right, it was Interview magazine.
No, I was gonna ask. Okay, so if it's horror but not really horror, Interview with a Vampire but no vampires, what is it then?
So it's a very dark romance, very bad, actually. So at the time, the big book of the time was Twilight. Twilight came out. My book was still in the pipeline to get towards publication, I think, or very close, whenever the tsunami for Twilight came out. So, publishers were sort of marketing to that audience, and they felt like it was a good book for that audience. But the problem was, it's definitely not YA. I mean, my book is a very, very dark, it's sort of an anti-romance. And I couldn't say it at the time because, again, we were trying to not scare away the people who really like Twilight and, we're really romantics at heart. But it really was written about to kind of teach the lesson that a lot of women go after love because they think that's what they have to have in their life and they're not ready for it. And it just ends up ruining their life. And that's really what the story is about, a woman who falls in love with the wrong man. And it ends up pulling her into an even worse situation.
I would argue that Twilight is also about that, though.
I have to admit, I never read it. And I only watched it because I
did when I had the flu once. I'm sorry.
Did it make you better or worse?
Somebody mailed all the books to me and said, I know you have the flu, because I had a popular blog. I know you have the flu. Read this, it'll make the time go by. And they were able, it was easy to read while I had a very high fever. And I did read all of them.
Yeah, and I don't mean to, bash anybody that loves Twilight. I think loving any book is not wrong.
It's
I mean,
good.
a book or two out there that you shouldn't love, but that's not one of them, right? Those are fabulous books, and if that's what you love, that's what you love, and we shouldn't have to make excuses for what we want to read. It's just that wasn't the book I wanted to write, but that was the book that I think really dominated the consciousness of publishers.
Yeah.
And so, there was a long period where they were trying to find books to compete in that space.
Right.
The new Twilight.
Yeah, and you had to then define yours in relation to that, even if it didn't really make a whole lot of sense to do so.
Well, I mean, a lot of the early press for it, for instance, Cosmo said it was Twilight for grown-ups, which you would have thought would be a great blurb, except then you got all the Twilight people like, what are you trying to say?
Right, you're 14. Oh, wait, sorry. You're not.
I wasn't 14.
So, so the book had a big push from the publisher, but it just didn't find the audience that they wanted it to find. It didn't find that level of success. So, but because a lot of people thought it was a vampire story, and there's a supernatural element to it. So I did reach out to the horror community, and they weren't very receptive. But I think in retrospect, I found at the time that they did not really want to accept the paranormal romance people, and and that unfortunately was a lot of the women who were writing horror at the time fell into that, and so they felt sort of alienated. So when The Hunger came out, which was quite a bit later, because I did a trilogy for the Taker books, when The Hunger came out, even my publisher wasn't quite sure where it fell in the bookstore, right? I think they saw it as more mainstream fiction. It just happened to have what a lot of people have pointed out, and I kind of have to agree. It's not a huge horror element to it. There's a lot of history. It's a very character-driven novel, again, all that fun stuff. But this time, the horror community was wonderful to me. I mean, early on, they just embraced the book and really made it easy. And so, my 4 years now back in the horror community, they've been just wonderful to me. And from what I've seen, very welcoming of women in the genre now.
They are. But I think it's like, and maybe like my past preconceived, I always feel like it's a struggle to say, well, I'm not a paranormal romance author. Like, because everybody assumes I write paranormal romance because there's a ghost and there's a woman in it or something. And they're just like, so when do they fall in love and blah, blah, blah. And like, even Amazon, like, somehow Amazon like chooses your categories for you. And
you're like, no.
Why am I listed in romance? And it was definitely not a romance. And my roommate coming back like, this wasn't a love story. And I'm like, it's not a love story.
Yeah. But you think now, like I've certainly noticed since The Hunger came out, it seems like we're into this sort of horror renaissance, and that more books are allowed to exist as horror novels, as horror stories. Whereas until fairly recently, it would have sort of been pushed over to this genre or that genre instead. And as a matter of fact, we've been talking about this a little bit in the horror community. It's widening. So books that in the past, most people wouldn't have even considered it as horror are also getting tagged as horror now, the sort of horror adjacent, which is a lot of domestic suspense that sort of slops over. Yeah.
And I think I think that's kind of where I fall. I think I fall in like gothic horror, but then even my non-horror stuff, I would think it's like in the horror universe. It's in the horror space. It's not uplifting, and there are horrifying things that happen. But
it's in that what I think is starting to be, a more popular area. And certainly broadening, where there are more books that are sort of, exploring the darker side of life and that sort of thing. And I always say that's because, life really is horrible for the most part. Really.
Oh my gosh, this is my quote of, we've been doing this show for almost a year. Life really is horrible. said Alma Katsu. That's going on the next like trailer for our show.
There you go. I mean, and I've said it before, I kind of come by it honestly. For many, many years, I was a humanitarian analyst, and that includes like genocides and mass atrocities, right? So for like 10 years, I followed just about the worst that you can see of humanity. It's a lot more widespread than people would imagine. And very horrible things happen every day that, if you're lucky, you're not aware of it. But all too many people really do have horror creeping into their lives in one way or another. And thank God for horror books, because it kind of helps you, relate then to the things that you're going through and to feel like you're not alone. It's comforting sometimes to see things mirrored in art and in other places that you're experiencing.
Oh gosh, I love that.
Well, and I get that. And I also even see the flip side, because all of this makes me think, well, why do we have such hard and fast genre lines? And I know for me personally, this is something that I've been beating my head against as far as publishers wanting things to fall into neat little boxes and people coming back going, we love this, except we don't know what box to put it in, and therefore it will not go in any box at all. And I think the fact that you already had a couple books come out and then, okay, well, now I'm willing to cross the line, and maybe it won't be as easy to cross the line, because one of the things you'd said earlier is your publisher would say it would be kind of silly to add a pen name now after you've already established this, because then you had this reputation as a beloved author with these highly readable award-winning books.
You're so kind.
But you don't want to leave that behind and then go, okay, but if I cross this genre line, I might lose readers. But I don't know anyone. I know people who don't read, and those people make me sad. But I don't know anyone who's like, I only read in this one genre. I know some people who don't read in certain genres, but everybody I know is open to general fiction or kind of places that are in between. So it's just interesting to me that you're going, all right, we're having a hard time because the people aren't following us over here, or all right, well, people don't necessarily want this, but horror is getting bigger. So I just wonder, well, okay, well, it's a spy novel. It's definitely not horror, but wouldn't horror readers still want to read a spy novel? And I guess maybe the question
I would say, as a horror reader, I want to read the spy novel.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that. The feeling I get, though, is just it's more or less in the minority. And I think what you say is true, Allison. People are more omnivorous as being a reader than maybe they even realize. But for the author, it's just more the minutia of marketing, right? Like you get people who follow you, who subscribe to your newsletter, who start following on Instagram because they like your horror stuff. Let's say they love the spooky pictures you put up, and then you have a spy novel coming out, and so you've got to kind of change horses in midstream. And I think some people lose interest at that point. It's not that they'd be against the spy novel, but they're not following me so much as I'm one of a stable of horror novelists that they like, for instance.
Yeah,
and I understand. I'm lucky to be in that position, but it just has
it's a good stable. So even if you're a horse that can travel to different stables, still a prize-winning horse.
Aw, I have a prize-winning horse.
You're a winning horse. I have to say, I love multiple point of views.
Ah, good.
So thank you. I am reading multiple POV. I like writing multiple POV. Every once in a while, you like hear things or, I don't want to have anybody else in my head. And I'm like, oh. So your book, The D, loved, because I was like, it took me like 3/4 of the way through to even realize who the main character was. I'm like, there was so much going on. And I was like, the deep is the main character. The deep is. The Titanic is. It was so great.
But to clarify, the iceberg is not the main character.
Iceberg is not the main character.
He has a brief cameo. But,
and the person who told me that obviously said it as a joke because they knew I was a Titanic dork and I would buy like anything. They were like, buy anything. And I was like, I just had to be like shown the cover of this book and I would have bought it. Just
one thing I have to say is, we hoped that a lot of Titanic fans would give the book a try. But one of the things I found out is that like a lot of the dyed-in-the-wool Titanic fans, and there's legions of them, right?
I'm not talking movie. I'm talking history.
No. I mean, really into the
actual
historic
boat.
Event, and they don't really like it fictionalized at all.
Oh, I love it.
Oh, thank you. Well, see, you're open-minded. That's why. But, and again, I don't mean to criticize people. Everyone's entitled to like what they want to like. It's just sometimes I feel like, well, if you could just loosen up a little bit, maybe you'd find something you would enjoy.
Well, and back to the genre thing, that's the same kind of idea, that there are people who are like, I don't like fill in the blank. And I was realizing, for me, even within my quote prefer genre, I'm technically a science fiction / fantasy writer, which maybe falls into speculative fantasy. But there are so many even within that genre that I'm like, well, I don't like it like this. I don't like it like that. I like a well-told story in just about any genre. And so it's not like a blanket anything, whether it's in my genre or outside my genre. And from doing this show, I've read a lot more horror, and I blame Jen. It's her fault.
My fault. Sorry.
Well, she's, at least when we first started, most of the guests were ones that were on Jen's wish list of her favorite authors.
You were on that list. Stalked.
So, exactly. Like, who has Jen been stalking on social media and would like to have come on and be able to talk to them? So that forced me to read more horror. And I go, okay, I really do enjoy it. But if you hadn't made me, I probably wouldn't have done that. So how do we make people get outside their comfort zone and push them towards books that they just don't know they would like?
Yeah, and that's such a problem.
That's a great
because
question.
I get that question all the time. Like, what do you read? I go on especially if this is like a more genre-oriented podcast or show or something, and they assume that, like a lot of horror readers, that's all I'm going to be into is horror. And I'm not. I'm like you, more of a generalist. I go for a book that's really well done. Mm-hmm. I prefer narratives that'll teach me something new, if at all possible, about the art of writing. That they do something really interesting, right, with the narrative that will widen my horizons. But I don't really just stick to one genre or the other. But then again, back to marketing. As a writer, then that makes it a little hard, because you really need to flock together with birds of a feather, and all together you do marketing things, and
we just need to like band into like a little group of like misfit toys that are like I'm part spy fiction, part historical drama, part paranormal, part sci-fi, part romance, like all the things that's like, it's just a good book. Can you read it?
Yeah. I'm just picturing that Venn diagram, Jen, and I think it turned into one of those prisms, and I got a headache.
Yeah, it was like a kaleidoscope.
So don't do that. No, but I'm doing my first live event at the end of next month, and I'm nervous about it, partially because this is for my romance side, and I am not a romance reader, and I've never made any bones about that. And I'm like, okay, I don't know if I'm enough in this genre either, and feeling like, okay, here are the birds of a feather. Am I flocking together? Or am I going to be like the one little penguin waddling around going, there's no
It's okay to be a penguin. It's okay to be a penguin.
I often felt that way. The Taker got a lot of play in the romance community. Even though it's not a happily ever after. Yeah, I felt like
if you don't have an HEA, you are not allowed to stay.
Right. I felt like I had to hide a lot. But most of certainly the authors, and I think a lot of the readers understood. And even though it wasn't happily ever after, it was a very intense love story, right? Mm-hmm. With huge emotions in it and just over the top characters that a lot of them got into. And only a few of them complained afterwards that, it wasn't really a romance.
Yeah, there will always be somebody who will say, if it doesn't have a happily ever after, or at least a happily for now, an HFN, then it is technically just not a romance. And
but there's nothing wrong with a love story.
There isn't. And then you say it's whatever other kind of story is with a love story component. But there's someone out there like the romance police who will say, no, it can't. But what I was going to say is I have a friend who writes LGBTQ plus romance. And they asked me, okay, does that HEA still requirement? Is that still a requirement if you're writing gay romance? Because the question was, well, is that even an expectation? Because is it enough of a different genre? Or does that community have different expectations about what love needs to look like? Is it as rigid as what the story has to have? And I'm going, I have never been the police on this. Why are you asking me that? But it was a good question.
It's a great question. But I think the answer to that is probably the same as the answer to most things, which is just all in the eye of the beholder. One person, there's not going to be any book that everybody loves and agrees on, right? So if it's somebody that has to have their happily ever after, they're not going to like your book if it deviates from that, and vice versa. But I don't think either one is not, legal, so to speak.
The romance police are going to come and push your book into another shelf.
That's what I used to worry about, but it doesn't happen. Yeah.
Well, and
Those
we've joked
Barnes
before,
and Noble employees they don't care where your book goes. They're just
They
going to
don't
put it
care.
wherever.
just alphabetize people, alphabetize. But we've joked that when we get these authors who have made a successful career about writing kind of on the margins of these different genres, that we say, well, that means you've earned yourself an end cap display and you get the whole side to yourself, because we don't know where else to put you anyway.
Yeah.
So
It's like this one's sci-fi, this one's
Mhm.
fantasy. I don't know.
I don't know.
Pick them all together.
Yep, that's fine.
So
I won't argue with that.
last week we had Josh Mallerman on our show,
Oh.
and he said nice things about you, because we were like, next week we have Alma Katsu, and he was like, I love Alma.
I love Josh. He's a
and
true artist. He's
a
really
true artist. He's an end capper.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like that, and I think you're an end capper, like where you're
Oh,
like, I
thank
don't like, where do we put all these books? I don't know where to put them. On the end cap where
Mhm.
it says like staff picks or
Yes.
must read.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you very much.
Now
Well,
I'm
I'm
wishing
still
I
trying to
wore
figure
my
out-
Titanic gown.
Yeah, and last time I was in a Barnes and Noble, they had one that actually said like a whole table of TikTok made me do it, and I kind of rolled my eyes and went,
Oh, I'm
This
sorry
is-
I made that face.
yeah, no, it's a scary thing because
I'm like,
trying to
I'll
figure
do
out-
this and make the face.
Yeah, you can do that. We don't have to see it. And again, people are allowed to like what they want to like. They're totally allowed to like TikTok, and they are allowed to make their buying purchases based on TikTok.
They are.
I was just surprised that Barnes and Noble was going along with it and going, TikTok
I
made
just
me do
feel
it.
like I'm too old to learn TikTok.
I'm older than you are, so that's why I call younger.
I can't learn it.
But you're a dancer and you're a theater person, so you probably have all the skills needed to actually be a successful TikToker.
I know. I see that, and I'm like, but
She
how
doesn't
do I
want
do
to.
that? And but again, this is so like silly. But like, how does because every time I say like I'm a ballroom dancer, they're like, what is your favorite dance? And I'm like, foxtrot. What do you write? And I'm like, horror, also crime. And they're like, that doesn't go together. So like it's just like my husband's my dance partner. We taught forever, we choreographed forever, and like our dance personality is, and then like my writing personality is like me in a wig standing in a swamp
It's
holding like
interesting.
antlers,
And how do all these pieces come together?
Not in a 15-second video. That's what I'll say for TikTok.
Not on TikTok. They come together in probably like a file that like a psychiatrist has or something like that. Like
Alma, I'm worried that you've had to read that in some of your correspondence. And
I know.
well, explain this. Well, here's her history.
Where's your history? I don't know.
No. It's you don't want me to give you an intelligence. You're not saying that this is something that I would have seen in my job.
I hope not.
No. You're a U.S. citizen.
I'm a U.S. citizen. I've never done anything wrong. No, I haven't.
There
Like-
you go. Yeah, you don't admit it on a
I'm like,
video.
one time.
Let me think about that. No, we're good.
No, I haven't done anything wrong.
Good.
It might seem my career is weird because it says things like magician's assistant, and also like now I work for a political advocacy firm.
It's a little
So
confusing.
it's a weird resume, but
It's intriguing.
I have varying interests. And
But I mean,
strengths.
I think all of us, we draw from our real life experience, and where we put it in may not be expected, because I do write from prior career experience, but it is not my experience as a lawyer. And it's one that's more a little bit, because I worked for a nonprofit that I don't mention, but then I fictionalized it. So
I was about to just say it.
you're not allowed to say it.
Am I not
Don't
allowed to
say it.
say it?
No, don't say it. I fictionalized it, and most people, when they read it, they can recognize what it is. But again, you change it up enough so that nobody comes after you and tries to say, "How dare you?" And I always only say positive things about it anyway, because it was a good experience I was drawing from. I was drawing from good things, not like, and here's how I was harassed by my boss or anything like that. None of that happened. But we all
That's
draw
why
from
I
it.
didn't know I wasn't even allowed to say it.
Oh,
We'll tell Alma after.
We'll tell Alma. When we
We're
go out
almost
there.
wrapping up.
Well,
That'll
that
be a
is
big secret.
one of the things that I did bring up in Red Widow, and that is, there's still a not inconsiderable amount of bias, against women. I think it's still a little harder to have to hit the heights that you would like to. And so another reason why it was so important to portray women characters who were just so professional and so ethical, and none of this, taint of it being sexualized or something like that. And it's funny. It's kind of sad that something like that would actually be seen as, new thing.
Yeah, groundbreaking. You're like, this should have been the standard,
it's
guys.
2021.
Because really, that's how it is, But when I talk to women, especially older women like myself, when we talk about whatever industry you're in, it's the same experience, where women, in order to get ahead, have to be so careful all the time about what they say and who they cross. And so you find, like in intelligence, the women are super ethical. They're not going to cross any lines. And yet, if someone's going to take a risk that's probably ill-advised or do something else that they're not supposed to do. Oh my goodness.
That's me.
Okay.
It's not my kids.
It's
It's just
happening.
we are by a fairly major street, and when the sirens go by, there they go.
I thought maybe the police had finally caught up with you.
No.
I thought they were catching up with you because they were like, she's saying too much.
They were calling on the landline earlier and you didn't pick up.
Right?
Like, stop talking to those girls about the CIA right now.
They're not going to come up all the way on this mountain, though.
It's too long. That mountain's too tall.
Too long and far.
But you were saying, you said the women couldn't take a risk because they would necessarily have to be that much more accountable, straightforward,
Yes.
always all the cards on the table, to be nothing but professional because their careers just had no wiggle room to be anything less than top notch all the time.
Right. I mean, and you guys probably can relate to this too. Like if somebody wanted to hurt you or take you down, right? Because you're a woman, you might be seen as more vulnerable. So you can't really give them any ammunition there, right? Whereas most of the male bosses I've had, and we're talking at mid to senior levels in two very important agencies, all admitted at some point to doing some stupid thing that I would have never considered, right? It's just too risky or ill-advised. But I think men felt a little freer to think, well, maybe I can get away with it.
Either that or there's also some kind of innate drive that just has that risk-taking component. I don't know if that goes into it. I know what they say, well, women live longer than men because men are more likely to make risks that women go, I'm not gonna do that. And
Yeah, I mean, that's
in a
certainly
good place or not.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly true, but we're also talking things that were just sort of ego stroking, right?
Yeah.
Where they flashed their CIA credentials in a public situation where they absolutely had no reason to. And these people had no reason to know they were CIA officials. In one case, it was just because he wanted to park his car in a no parking zone.
Are you kidding me?
I'm not kidding you.
I wish that was a joke, Alma. I wish that was a joke.
I'm only laughing because pre-COVID, when I got the job that I have now, I was like, I'm going to have a state house ID. Does that get me anywhere? And my boss was like, no. I'm like, but can I show it to people? He's like, no one will be impressed. I'm like, yeah.
Well, the agency, you
won't.
don't show people your credentials, right? You're supposed to hide that. So he knew he wasn't supposed to do it. And to do it in exchange for
a parking spot.
Right. A parking spot was even more egregious. And like I said, I've never known any woman to do something like that because you just know it's a stupid thing to do.
We know we're going to park far away.
Right.
We wore uncomfortable shoes. We'll pay the price anyway.
Look,
we're going.
That's our whole life.
I'm just laughing because I'm reminded there is a story from the Bible where one of the brothers, I'm pretty sure it's Jacob and Esau, one of them literally sells his inheritance for a pot of stew. And that's kind of the same idea of like, my entire birthright and inheritance and blessing from my father, but I'm kind of hungry right now. I'll flash my credentials. It's a good parking space. Did you see the parking space?
That stew was delicious.
It was not worth it. Was it worth everything? And so for this story, you knew about it. Was there any kind of repercussion for the person doing this?
Well, no. I mean, he didn't make it generally known.
He just told you.
He was sitting around. There was a couple of us in the office. He decided he was going to tell us why. I have no idea. Did he think we were going to be impressed?
No.
You parked where? Alma, I do declare.
Right. Well, yeah, this gives you some insight, right? But you recognize the type right away. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We all do. I could talk about this type and just all of this forever. I hate to stop us now, but we are out of time.
Oh, well, this was so much fun. Thank you so
Alma,
much.
please come back. I know we didn't even get to talk about what you're working on next. We'll figure that out. Maybe you're just taking a long, deserved rest. But
No, I have to juggle 2 lines, so I'm actually doing the final revisions on the next historical horror novel.
Oh,
Okay, so you're not done historical novels. So how much do we redesign a web page when you're not leaving that behind?
Well, yeah, it's got to cover both. Is the weird thing that's going on. So yeah, it's called The Fervor, and it'll be out next spring. It deals with the Japanese internment during World War II.
Oh,
can I pre-order it now, or are you still writing it?
I know. Is it still? Is it? I'm like, is it available for pre-order?
No, I don't think it's available for pre-order because it's going to be next
never
spring,
know.
so it's almost a year away.
Well, and you can tell people who don't understand, look at the pattern. The fervor, the hunger, the deep. If it's 2 words and the first word is the, it's historical horror. There you go. Solve the problem.
And then all of your spy novels could just be a color.
Well, they're all Red something, isn't it?
Red something. Oh my God, I love it.
Done.
Red London.
Done. I feel like we got an exclusive. Everybody who's watching. I'm just making that up.
Like, no.
No, we didn't get it.
That wasn't classified. Sorry, Jen.
Darn it. I always try to get authors to like tell us something they don't want to, where I'm like, tell me your next project. So thank you, Alma, for being here. You were amazing. Allison, of course, thank you. Thank you to Roman Siratin, my producer, our producer. Also my husband, my Russian spy. He's like mortified right now. Thank you to
Roman.
Pam Stack, our executive producer. And thank you to everybody at the Global Authors on the Air Radio Network, where it's official.
Okay, did Jen literally just drop right now?
I think
that is hilarious. She was going to make an announcement, and I don't know if we were supposed to get. Okay, Roman is in the chat right now. Am I allowed to announce it, or is Jen coming back on? Okay, Roman's saying, okay, Jen, you're back.
I'm here.
It's hilarious.
Amazing. I know my phone overheated. Okay, I can announce it right now.
Go ahead.
Vox Vomitus is the #1 show on the Global Authors on the Air Radio Network. It's official, so that's like our little announcement.
Congratulations.
Sorry.
So much
like
drama.
The build-up was bad because
and I'm sitting there reading what Roman wrote on the side. I'm like, am I supposed to say it? Is she coming back? Where did Jen go?
I don't even know where I went. It just like turned off and came back on.
You went into the deep.
I went into the deep. Oh my gosh, I did. Please, everybody, join us next week when we're going to be talking to Mary Dixie Carter, author of The Photographer, also daughter of Hollywood legends Dixie Carter and Hal Holbrook. Stop me in advance if I ask her about running around on the set of Designing Women Too Much. I know.
Sorry.
So tune in next week. Mary Dixie Carter. The week after that is Allison and I's 1-year anniversary show. Woo! Watch us just interview each other and maybe like cry and drink bourbon and just be happy and sad. Stay tuned. That's the next 2 weeks.